14:22 p.m. Northern Persian Gulf, 44 nautical miles southwest of Farsi Island. An Iranian Peykaap fast attack craft just fired 2 unguided rockets at USS Winston Churchill. Not a machine gun burst, not an RPG round aimed at empty water. 2 107mm unguided rockets, the type Iran deploys on its IRGCN fast attack craft for coastal interdiction, fired at a range of 340 meters from the Churchill's starboard beam. The first rocket passed over the destroyer's main deck at an estimated altitude of 11 feet and detonated on impact with the water 22 meters off the port side. The second rocket struck the water 9 meters short of the starboard hull and detonated. 9 meters. The underwater pressure wave from the second detonation was sufficient to trip 2 circuit breakers in the Churchill's after-engine room and momentarily cavitate one of the starboard propeller shafts. The engineering watch petty officer had the breakers reset in 40 seconds. The shaft cavitation cleared on its own in 11. But the Churchill was part of a carrier escort formation. It was not alone, and the 5 additional Iranian fast attack boats that had been closing on the formation from 3 separate bearings for the previous 9 minutes had just watched the Peykaap fire, and none of them had broken off. Welcome to Navy Combat USA. This is the afternoon Iranian forces fired rockets at a U.S. Navy destroyer protecting a carrier strike group in the northern Persian Gulf. And what happened in the following 8 minutes determined whether that carrier came home. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group had been operating in the Persian Gulf for 27 days when the attack on Churchill occurred. The group's operational posture in the northern basin, a deliberate demonstration of American presence in waters adjacent to Iran's primary naval basing areas, had generated continuous IRGCN attention since the strike group entered the Gulf through the strait. In 27 days, the escort vessels had logged 43 IRGCN harassment contacts, 43 separate interactions with Iranian patrol boats, fast attack craft, and coastal patrol vessels. Every one of them had followed the established harassment pattern: approach, challenge, break off. Not one of them had involved weapons discharge. Until 14:22 p.m., the carrier Truman was operating 18 nautical miles southwest of the Churchill's position at the time of the attack. The strike group's standard formation placed the carrier in the center of a defensive screen of escort vessels. The Churchill was the northernmost escort, the ship between the Truman and the Farsi Island base that served as the IRGCN's primary operating platform in the northern Gulf. The Churchill's position was the most exposed position in the formation. The Iranians had been watching the formation's geometry for 27 days. They knew which ship was the northernmost escort. They had chosen their target accordingly. The approach of the 6 Iranian vessels had begun at 14:13 p.m., 9 minutes before the rocket attack. 3 Bagamar fast attack craft had emerged from the Farsi Island operating area on a direct intercept bearing moving at 46 knots. 2 Peykaap-class boats had appeared from the northwest at 14:15 p.m. A 6th contact, another Peykaap, had appeared from the northeast at 14:18 p.m. 6 boats, 3 approach vectors. The geometry was the same encirclement template that had appeared in 4 previous incidents across the Persian Gulf patrol area. USS Churchill's commanding officer, Commander Angela Torres, recognized it immediately. She had read every after-action review from every encirclement incident in the past 18 months. She had run the encirclement response scenario in her ship's tactical training cycle 6 times. She called General Quarters at 14:15 p.m., 7 minutes before the rockets. She transmitted a potential hostile action report to 5th Fleet at 14:16 p.m. She placed the Mark 38 Bushmaster on local control and the SM-2 cells in pre-launch warm-up at 14:17 p.m. She was as prepared as she could be. At 14:19 p.m., the 6 boats completed their encirclement, distances ranging from 280 to 420 meters, all boats stationary or near stationary, matching the Churchill's 12-knot transit speed. Torres transmitted an updated contact report to Fifth Fleet and to the Truman's Battle Group Command Center simultaneously. At the Truman, Strike Group Commander Rear Admiral David Chen received the report and immediately activated the carrier's Combat Air Patrol. 2 FA-18Fs from VFA-11, the Red Rippers, that had been on Alert 5 since the strike group entered the Persian Gulf 27 days earlier. The FA-18Fs launched at 14:20 p.m., 2 minutes before the rocket attack. They were airborne. They were not yet overhead. At 14:22 p.m., the Peykaap at 340 meters on the Churchill's starboard beam fired 2 rockets. Commander Torres was on the bridge wing when the rockets fired. She saw the launch flash and had time to grab the bridge wing railing before the first detonation hit the water to port, and the second detonation sent a pressure wave through the hull that she felt in her feet through the deck plating. She was back at the tactical display in 4 seconds. The situation had changed fundamentally. 6 boats in the water, 2 rockets fired, weapons employed against an American warship. The rules of engagement were clear. Weapons had been fired. Hostile act was confirmed. Defensive fire was authorized. What was not clear, not in 4 seconds, with 6 boats at ranges between 280 and 420 meters, was which of those 6 boats to engage first, in what order, and with what weapons, given that the carrier Truman was 18 nautical miles away, and any weapons exchange that escalated beyond what the Churchill's own systems could manage would place the carrier in a threat environment it needed time to respond to. Torres made 3 decisions in 8 seconds. First, Bushmaster on the Peykaap that had fired. That boat was the confirmed threat. It was the designated first engagement target. Second, activate electronic jamming on all IRGCN tactical frequencies to degrade the formation's ability to coordinate a follow-on attack. Third, transmit immediately to Fifth Fleet and to Truman. Weapons employed, defensive fire authorized, engaging. She gave the Bushmaster order at 14:22 p.m. and 12 seconds after the rockets were fired. Petty Officer First Class Michael Santos, the Bushmaster gunner, was already tracking the Peykaap. He fired at 14:22 p.m. and 14 seconds. The Bushmaster's first burst, 8 rounds at 340 meters, struck the water short by approximately 15 meters. Santos adjusted elevation and fired a second burst at 14:22 p.m. and 17 seconds. The second burst impacted the Peykaap's bow section. The 25mm round struck the forward hull at the waterline, punching through the fiberglass and aluminum structure of the boat's forward compartment. No secondary explosions. No propulsion kill. But the forward compartment flooded immediately, dropping the bow into the water and reducing the boat's speed from approximately 20 knots to approximately 8 knots within 30 seconds. The boat was not sinking, it was damaged and slowing. At 14:22 p.m. and 31 seconds, 17 seconds after the rocket attack, the second Peykaap, positioned 380 meters to the northwest, began to accelerate directly toward the Churchill. Another ramming approach, another Peykaap at high speed. Torres did not wait to assess it. Bushmaster, shift target northwest Peykaap, engage. Santos swung the cannon and fired 2 bursts at the accelerating contact. The range was opening as the Peykaap closed, 360 meters, 320 meters, 290 meters. And the Bushmaster rounds were impacting the water consistently close, but not striking the hull. At 14:23 p.m. and 04 seconds, the 2 FA-18Fs from VFA-11 arrived overhead. Call sign Ripper 41 and Ripper 42. 2 aircraft at 300 feet, afterburners lit, passing directly over the Churchill's position at 510 knots. The pass took them directly over the accelerating Peykaap at 270 meters and closing. The Peykaap's driver cut the throttle at 14:23 p.m. and 09 seconds, at 270 meters, 9 seconds after the Hornets had arrived overhead. The boat decelerated from its ramming approach speed. It did not turn. It did not accelerate again. It sat in the water, engine at idle, 270 meters from the Churchill's port side. 270 meters? The tactical situation at 14:23 p.m. and 15 seconds, 53 seconds after the first rockets were fired, was as follows. The Peykaap that had fired the rockets was damaged, bow low in the water, speed reduced to 8 knots, moving erratically northeast, not sinking, not out of the fight, but effectively removed from coordinated action. The second Peykaap was at 270 meters, engines idled, not maneuvering. The 4 Bogomars were holding their positions at 300 to 420 meters, none of them accelerating. The 2 FA-18Fs were establishing a combat air patrol orbit above the Churchill's position, low and loud, on a racetrack pattern that took them over the Iranian formation on every northern pass. Torres assessed the situation and made the call that the immediate threat had been suppressed. She ordered the Bushmaster to maintain aim on the idled Peykaap and continued transmitting contact reports to 5th Fleet and Truman. At 14:24 p.m., she made a request to 5th Fleet that was not in any standard post-engagement protocol. She requested authorization to pursue the damaged Peykaap and render aid, not to the Iranian boat, to check whether any of the crew had been injured by the Bushmaster fire. The request was unusual, unprecedented in recent IRGCN harassment engagements. 5th Fleet's response came back in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Negative. Maintain position. Do not approach damaged Iranian vessel. Torres acknowledged. At the Truman, Rear Admiral Chen had been monitoring the Churchill's contact reports in real time from the moment the encirclement began. He had the full tactical picture on his display. The rocket attack, the Bushmaster engagement, the Peykaap deceleration when the Hornets arrived. He transmitted a flash contact report to 5th Fleet at 14:23 p.m., 1 minute after the rocket attack, and simultaneously directed the carrier's battle watch commander to prepare a second pair of F/A-18Fs for launch if the situation escalated. 5th Fleet's response to Chen's flash report arrived at 14:26 p.m. The response contained 2 elements. The first was an acknowledgement that the defensive engagement had been authorized and correctly executed. The second was an order. The Truman Strike Group was to alter course southeast and increase speed to 20 knots, moving the carrier away from the northern basin while the air cover managed the immediate threat. Moving the carrier. Not because the Truman was in immediate danger. The carrier was 18 nautical miles from the engagement, but because 18 nautical miles and a Peykaap-class boat carrying anti-ship missiles represented a threat geometry that 5th Fleet was not willing to manage in real time if the 6-boat formation found a way to break through the Churchill's defensive coverage. The Truman turned southeast at 14:27 p.m. The strike group reoriented around the carrier's new course. The Churchill, with the 2 Hornets overhead, held its position in the northern basin until the formation disengaged. The disengagement began at 14:31 p.m., 9 minutes after the rocket attack. The 4 Boghammers turned northwest simultaneously, accelerating toward the Farsi Island operating area at approximately 40 knots. The idled Peykaap followed 3 minutes later, engines coming back up to cruise speed, moving northwest without the aggressive maneuvering that had characterized its approach. The damaged Peykaap, the one Santos had struck with the Bushmaster, was moving erratically northeast at reduced speed. At 14:39 p.m., an IRGCN support vessel emerged from the vicinity of Farsi Island and moved toward the damaged boat. The support vessel reached the Peykaap at 14:51 p.m. and stood by alongside it. By 1500 p.m., the contact group had cleared the immediate area. The 2 FA-18Fs remained on station above the Churchill for another 47 minutes before returning to the Truman. The Churchill rejoined the Carrier Strike Group's formation at 16:04 p.m., taking its position in the escort screen as the Truman's group moved southeast through the central Persian Gulf. The post-incident battle damage assessment of USS Churchill was completed within 6 hours. The two 107mm rocket detonations had produced no hull damage, no flooding, no fire. The engineering issues: the tripped circuit breakers and propeller shaft cavitation had been resolved within minutes of the attack. No personnel casualties. The Churchill had been fired on and had not been hurt. But the strike group had moved the carrier. That was the outcome the Iranians had been able to observe. 6 boats had fired rockets at the northernmost escort of a U.S. Carrier Strike Group, and the carrier had changed course and increased speed to put distance between itself and the engagement. The carrier had moved. Whether the IRGCN planners who had executed the operation considered that a successful outcome was a question the intelligence community spent considerable time analyzing in the weeks following the incident. The answer, according to the assessment, was yes. The operation had been assessed by Iranian planners as having demonstrated that IRGCN action could influence the movement of an American carrier in the Persian Gulf, not sink it, not defeat it, influence its movement. That was sufficient from the Iranian strategic perspective to justify the operation. The after-action review identified 6 findings, 3 of which generated immediate changes to Carrier Strike Group doctrine for Persian Gulf operations. The first finding addressed the rocket weapon employment. The 107mm unguided rockets used in the attack were not weapons that IRGCN fast attack craft had employed against U.S. Navy vessels in any documented previous incident. The previous threat assessment for Peykaap-class boats in the northern Persian Gulf had cataloged their C-701 anti-ship missile capability and their gun armament, but had not flagged the rocket launch rail installation on some Peykaap variants as a primary threat. The gap between the threat assessment and the employed weapon was identified as a collection failure. The rocket rail installation had been visible in imagery of the specific Peykaap involved, but had been assessed as decorative or non-functional in the most recent review cycle. The assessment was wrong. The rails were functional. The ammunition was aboard. The finding generated a mandatory re-examination of all collected imagery of IRGCN Peykaap class boats for rocket rail installations. The re-examination identified 4 additional boats with similar installations that had been previously assessed as non-functional. The threat assessment was updated. The second finding addressed the carrier's movement. The Truman's course change had been operationally sound. Moving a carrier away from an active engagement was standard protective doctrine. But the review noted that the course change had been observable to IRGCN forces and had likely been assessed by Iranian planners as a demonstration that IRGCN action could produce predictable carrier behavior. The review recommended a protocol for carrier course changes in response to escort engagements that varied the response pattern, sometimes moving toward the engagement, sometimes moving away, sometimes holding course, to prevent Iranian forces from developing confidence that a specific action would produce a specific carrier response. The protocol was implemented. The third finding was the Bushmaster employment outcome. Santos's fire had damaged the attacking Peykaap and effectively removed it from the engagement. The review characterized the engagement as professionally executed under fire and recommended Santos for a Navy Achievement Medal. The medal was approved. The review also noted that the Peykaap had not been destroyed. It had been damaged and recovered by an IRGCN support vessel. The review declined to recommend lethal engagement against a vessel that had been suppressed, citing the ROE framework governing proportionality. The damaged Peykaap was operational again within 30 days. Commander Torres's post-incident report addressed the question that the review panel had not asked directly, but which everyone involved in the incident had been thinking about. She wrote, "The 2 rockets fired at USS Churchill were not aimed at open water. They were fired at the ship. One of them detonated 9 meters from the hull. The ROE authorized defensive action from the moment of that detonation. I engaged the firing vessel and suppressed the ramming approach of a second vessel. The formation disengaged when air cover arrived. This was the correct outcome. What concerns me is not what happened. What concerns me is that the 9-meter proximity of the second detonation is a smaller margin than any of the 27 days of previous contacts had suggested we were approaching. The escalation trajectory in the northern Gulf has been moving toward this point for some time. The question the review should answer is not whether we responded correctly to what happened. The question is, what happens when the rockets are aimed more precisely? The review did not directly answer that question. The Chief of Naval Operations read the report and requested a separate assessment of IRGCN escalation trajectory in the northern Gulf. The assessment was completed 41 days after the incident. It was classified at the TS/SCI level. Its findings have not been made public, but 3 weeks after the assessment was delivered, Fifth Fleet quietly reduced the frequency of Carrier Strike Group operations in the northern Persian Gulf above the 26th parallel. The formal justification was operational efficiency. Nobody in the building believed that was the full story. The USS Winston Churchill remained on patrol in the Persian Gulf for 14 additional days following the rocket attack. On its final transit south through the strait, the Keshem Island surveillance radar tracked it continuously. The fire control radar stayed in standby. The Churchill transited without incident, but the 9-meter margin was in the engineering log. The tripped circuit breakers were documented. The propeller shaft cavitation event was in the maintenance record. And somewhere at Farsi Island, the rocket rails on the Peykaap that Santos had damaged were being replaced. The crew that had fired them was still there. Stay vigilant, stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.